With that, let me introduce our guest. Larry Puderbach is the Associate Vice President of Research at Merck. He heads quality across preclinical and clinical areas. In the quality, in January, the FDA and EMA jointly published these first ever principles for AI in drug development.
All right.
Uh, biggest
I'll do my best.
biggest misconception about AI in pharma right now.
I think the biggest misperception about AI in pharma right now is that people, I think, assumed it could do a lot more than it could initially. I think the draft FDA guidance around the use of AI in drug development, and also I think just looking from a key principles perspective, the FDA EMA AI principles document. I think we're underthinking it. It's interesting because I think there's different risk tolerances depending on the GXP area. I think there's less of a risk tolerance from an AI perspective on the.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AI in Pharma R&D. I am Nagesh Nama, CEO of XLM Continuous Intelligence. I am thrilled to have you here. We got over 350 people registered from more than 100 companies, which tells you something about how much this topic matters right now. Quick housekeeping before you dive in. This is a conversation, not a lecture. No slides, no scripted answers. Use the chat to tell us where you're joining from and what's on your mind. Drop your questions in the Q&A panel or the comments section of the LinkedIn Live event. We'll get to as many as we can in the second half. This session is being recorded and will be available on LinkedIn afterwards. One important note: the views shared today are those of Larry and his personal and professional capacity. They don't represent the official positions of his employer, which is Merck. We are here for honest, boots on the ground perspectives, what actually is working, what's not, and what's next. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, which is XLM Continuous TV. You will find all the important links in the event details section below. Let me set the stage for why this conversation matters right now. We are at a genuine inflection point. In January, the FDA and EMA jointly published these first ever principles for AI in drug development. 10 guiding principles that signal real regulatory alignment across the Atlantic. We even published a newsletter last week. The EU AI's Act high-risk provisions take effect this August. That includes clinical trial design, safety signal detection. Meanwhile, the AI clinical trials market is projected at nearly $1.5 billion this year. But here's the tension. There is a gap between the headlines, AI compresses discovery timelines by 30 to 40%, and what's actually happening inside regulated organizations. The gap is where the interesting stories live. And that's exactly what we are going to explore today with someone who lives in this gap every day. With that, let me introduce our guest. Larry Puderbach is the Associate Vice President of Research at Merck. He heads quality across preclinical and clinical areas, the quality, technology quality, pharmacovigilance quality, and more. Larry, that's too much. Before Merck, Larry spent over 14 years at Pfizer in senior compliance and quality roles, consulting at IBM on pharma regulatory compliance. And this is one of my favorite parts. He even taught computer system quality and compliance at Temple University for a decade. We are talking about someone with 30 plus years at the intersection of quality, technology, and regulated science. Larry, welcome and nice to have you.
Great. It's great to be here, Nagesh. Thank you.
If you can kindly introduce yourself and also let the audience know how your team is structured and what are the different activities you and your team undertake on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll just give you a little bit of high level history of my background. I spent probably the first 15 years of my career on the GMP side of quality and manufacturing facilities, grew up during validation work and quality activities and things like that. The middle of my career, I spent some time in compliance and quality, both in the GMP area as well as some of the research quality areas. Since joining Merck about 10 years ago, I focused primarily on the research quality area. And I've had differing groups within my organization, including the supplier quality function, the tech quality function. Right now, my organization consists of the pharmacovigilance quality aspect, the strategy and operations group, the preclinical GLP quality piece, and the animal welfare function that oversees the regulations associated with the welfare of animals used in research. And then I have a group that's, I think, relevant to this conversation that's we affectionately call ANTS, and that's analytics and tech systems. So this is a group who the tech systems piece of it kind of owns our quality system, our QMS system. We use Veeva. And the analytics piece of it, that piece of the group does analytics and Gen AI and AI work. And the reason that I think we kind of built that capacity within quality is that, like many companies in industry, we were faced with the prospect of a growing workload through acquisitions, through collaborations, through growth in the internal pipeline with less people. And we had the option of either A, just saying we're going to do less and take on more risk, or B, saying we're going to change the way we work and try to implement digital solutions, analytics, AI. And the fact is that there's many high priority projects that our IT organization and the MRL side is supporting, and they did not have the capacity to provide us the level of support that we needed in order to move, the quality organization forward in this area. So we built that capacity ourselves over the course of the last couple of years. And within our organization, we have several data scientists. We have a group that builds the visualizations from a dashboard perspective, and we have individuals who also have background in AI, and we're leveraging that to help drive the quality area forward and kind of change the way we're working.
Larry, that's a mouthful. I think that's a lot of work you and your team have are taking on right now. Let's get into it. There's a massive amount of excitement about AI right now, and you can't open a single pharma data publication without seeing AI powered in the headline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you are part of some of those groups, which we'll talk about it soon. But I want to talk about what's actually happening on the ground. I mean, that's the core of this LinkedIn Live event, is to just to hear from you, from not the theory, but some of the strategies, difficulties, bumps, successes. We would like to really get that from you. Larry, from your vantage point, leading research quality, whereas AI is genuinely making a difference today. That's what I read about. I know because I talk to many people like you. And where is the reality really lagging behind the hype? That's one thing we would like to kick it off with.
Yeah. So I think, if you look across the spectrum of research, I think where you really see AI making a big difference is in like the discovery space, the identification of molecules, because it's not GXP, right? It's not real regulated, right? Where you see more trepidation and perhaps things moving a little bit slower is when you get into that space around, the GXP space and the use of AI. And what we've seen, and this is true, I think, across the industry, is where it's fallen a little bit short is, I think a lot of companies initially, when some of these AI models first started coming out, they tried to identify big win projects, right? That were going to save a ton of money, save a ton of time. And I think, at least initially, they didn't come to fruition. Or if they did come to fruition, what they were saving was much less than what they anticipated. So what we've done in the quality space is we've focused more on looking at end-to-end processes and trying to identify areas where there's a lot of manual activity, or, there's multiple systems being utilized, or there's a bottleneck in a process. Trying to identify if we can leverage AI to help eliminate some of that bottleneck. I'll give you one example is, one of the areas we've looked at it a couple different areas, and we continue to look at additional areas. But one of the areas is, if you look at auditor prep, right? When auditors go out and prep for an audit, whether it be a supplier or whether it be a clinical investigator site, there's a lot of documentation that they have to look at from a historical perspective to prep for that audit and ensure that they know what they're looking at, right? And when they go out on the audit. That used to be manually pulled from multiple different systems. And, now we're leveraging different AI models to kind of automatically pull some of that information into and put it in a format that's useful to the auditor from a preparation standpoint. So that's a big savings. We've also identified, when you write up an audit report, you have to identify what the regulatory basis for that particular finding is. That takes time, from an auditor perspective of being able to identify, what is the reference in the regulation, whether it be FDA, whether it be EMA, or or MHRA, we've developed an AI tool. You put in an audit finding, and it'll find the reference in the regulations, and it'll take you right to that specific reference. And of course, this is all with a person in the loop. They're verifying that the reference is applicable and everything like that. The other place that we're looking at it is we're looking at it for helping to write audit findings. And audit reports. So, you have to have enough data to kind of train the system, right? And so not all audit areas have enough data, but in certain areas, like in the clinical investigator site, clinical investigator site audits, where we've done historically a couple hundred audits a year, we have enough substrate, and we're working with, some Gen AI tools to be able to say, okay, if I put in a finding, the Gen AI tool can kind of generate the report and also help suggest the category for the finding. And again, this is all with a human in the loop, kind of reviewing and verifying that the information in there is correct. So that's some of the areas that we're looking at using it in the QA space. I think there's some broader challenges from a general GXP perspective.
Larry, just to recap what you just said, you spoke about three different sections of the workflow, right? One is helping the auditors prep, right? That's one spec. Other one is let's say they write up a observation, then we need to link it to a citation, meaning link it to the appropriate regulation, whether it's EMA, FDA. So that's one thing. Other one is even drafting the report and categorizing or analyzing this one itself. So all these things are right. These are not massive projects, correct? At a Merck level.
Correct.
And so how does your group or somebody like your group handle such project? Is it done within your group, or is it IT developing these different applications?
So IT will, and this is one of the things when we first started, when AI first became a big thing, whether it be a year and a half, 2 years ago, there were committees set up, I think, within Merck MRL to identify big AI projects, right? That could save time, resources. The type of projects that we were proposing are small potatoes, right? So they didn't reach the level of that. That's part of, we do that internally within QA. We do not, we get tokens from IT.
Yep.
We have to put forward a use case, proposal, and IT will give us the tokens to work on it. But it's all generated within the quality organization, this AI work that I was referring to.
That means you have developers, data scientists, right? People who know Gen AI application development to work within your group. So is that a better model for such applications, because you're very close to the data maybe and how the workflow is supposed to work, right? So it kind of embedded in your group.
Yeah, well, ours was kind of born out of necessity, right? Based on the fact that we needed to move the organization forward, and we couldn't, and the ITD group didn't have the capacity to provide the support necessary. But yes, an artifact of that is that it is a better model, I believe, because these data scientists have an opportunity to learn the business, and we've given them an opportunity to kind of shadow some of the different groups that they're working with, to learn a little bit more about their audit processes, report writing processes, prep processes, and they have a better understanding of the data, I think, and the significance of the data, because they've had that opportunity to kind of embed themselves within, some of the quality processes.
So when, like within your group, these are something that's working, right? You're utilizing some of the utility or Gen AI mini apps that you just mentioned, right? So it's already in force. And so what has been your experience so far using them, or your group using them?
So the couple I mentioned about the audit prep and the other tool that will identify the regulatory reference is live. And I mean, it's been, I think, a significant cost savings time. And I think the auditors looked at it and, said, this is something that can help me. The report writing one is in pilot. We're hoping to go live with it, I think, probably around the middle of this year. Once we go live with the first set of first area, from a quality perspective, we'll start to look at other areas within quality where there may be enough data to kind of train the model. One of the challenges we had, I think, when you first start talking about AI, is that people think that AI is going to replace them, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and in some cases, in bigger use cases, that may be true, to some extent. But in the way we're leveraging AI, I think auditors had to get comfortable and they had to see the actual they had to see the output and see that we weren't trying to replace them. We were trying to assist them and aid them.
System.
And, we have a smaller organization than we had a year or two ago, and we continue to have more work that's coming in, and that's part of what we're trying to leverage AI for is and trying to make sure that auditors are educated on that these are intended as tools to help you.
Let's just take that audit prep, the module or an app that helps the auditors prepare, right?
Mhm.
Can you just give us an idea as to how long do you think typically an app like that took your group to develop?
I'm sure we have metrics on this because, one of the things with these AI projects is that it gets a lot of visibility. And, Merck's no different than any other company, I think. But from a Merck research perspective, the use of AI and leveraging digital is being focused on at the very senior levels within the organization. And part of it is they want to see what the benefit of it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we do OKRs, outcomes and key results, and so I'm sure we have OKRs for the audit prep tool. But what I would say is that you're probably taking something that was a week's worth of prep time for an auditor, and you're narrowing it down into something that's probably a day or two, or less in that. And the other advantage of it is that it's not just a matter of the auditor pulling all these different documents from different sources. They have to be able to look across these different type of documents and make any relevant connections, from an audit prep perspective. And, I think we're continuing to work through this, but as we continue to hone some of these tools, we can give them relevant information in a singular format that helps them again save time.
This is a big efficiency booster, right? From a week
Yeah, absolutely.
to 1 or 2 days, correct? And it gets better, I think, when you tweak the algorithm, maybe to work faster. The models are getting better, right?
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
getting more
absolutely.
capable. So I think it will not go down, in my opinion. It can only go up in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, and I think, we're looking at other potential use cases also. One of the advantages again of having data scientists within the quality organization is that, we'll send them out to conferences and they'll network with individuals from other companies. And in some cases, they bring back potential use cases, right? And we've had a use case, that we're starting to talk about where we can leverage analytics with an AI component to hopefully say, okay, well, you had, for example, an auditor inspection finding, right? You developed a kappa associated with that. You implemented the kappa. How do we know that kappa is effective? So it can leverage, that's one of the use cases that we're talking about and looking about is, can we leverage analytics and AI components to help us identify areas where we found issues before CAP has been implemented, but it's not effective.
Larry, I would like to touch upon a couple of things going back to any of your apps, right, that you mentioned to help the auditors, for example. Can you just walk us through what does it take to build them? That's maybe sometimes easier part. Then what does it take to validate them and make sure that they're accurate within a reasonable range? It will not be perfect, right?
Yeah.
And can you just walk us through the process? And lastly, can you also throw some light on if such an application is looked at by the inspectors, right, from the health authorities? What has been there? How do they look at it? What is their approach to how it should be used? And and if you can just throw that will be very useful to the audience.
Yeah. Well, a few things. One is I'm no Gen AI guru, right? So from a build perspective, I can't necessarily speak a lot to that. I do know that, what we do generally is we'll have like our data scientists with Gen AI experience, we'll connect them in. There's two parts to it. We'll connect them in with the relevant quality team, right? And we'll talk about, where is the opportunity to leverage analytics or AI in this particular space. And they'll work with the relevant SME from the quality area to understand where the challenge is and how, analytics or Gen AI might do it. And then they'll work on build of the tool. And it's kind of it's a, it's a, it's a back and forth, right? It's not as if they go off and 3 months later come back with a tool. It's, in testing and input from the stakeholder groups. From a validation perspective, well, first of all, let me take a step back. One of the key things on this, and this is something that I don't know that most organizations have solved, and it's something that we're currently looking at cross divisions within Merck, is when is an AI tool GXP? Because if you have, I mean, we're able to say, okay, if we have a digital system, for example, we have pretty clear criteria about how we look at that to determine if it's GXP, right? And it needs to go through the a formal SDLC process, right? From a Gen AI tool, it's a little bit different. And, one of the things that we've looked at we formed this AI and GXP work stream that goes across divisions. One of the things that we've identified is we don't necessarily have clear criteria from an AI perspective in identifying when AI is GXP. Because I'll give you an example. Use analytics or you use Gen AI as part of your analytics, and it gives you like signal detection, right? But then you have an auditor that goes and kind of verifies that signal. Is that GXP or is that just a tool that is putting an auditor focus in a certain area that they're going to essentially manually verify? So that's one of the things that I think that's being discussed. I think from a validation perspective, I think if you're talking about Gen AI that has more kind of a deterministic output, in other words, you're using Gen AI to pull data from, say, multiple different sources and put it into a table, say like for submission to regulators or something. You can put that through a more traditional SDLC model, right? You can validate that. When you come to Gen AI, that's, that's a whole different ballgame, because that's something that I don't know as anyone's particularly solved for. And I don't think you can put it through necessarily a traditional SDLC model, because you're not sure what the output is supposed to be, right? So you have to do more of I think the FDA uses terminology like a credibility assessment with ongoing performance monitoring to demonstrate the accuracy of the tool's not drifting.
Yes. And they make it very clear, even in Annex 22, which doesn't apply to you, it's on the manufacturing side, right?
Yeah.
They're not letting
Yeah.
us use Gen AI, but they do let us use ML models, deterministic models. So they have prescribed exactly what they expect, just like you said. So I think this is very interesting, right? Because we're not only developing tools, which is evolving at a very fast pace, but also it's the traditional validation models will not work, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I think we as a company and you're also part of other consortiums, which we'll talk about a little bit, the Impala consortium. So I'm pretty sure some of those things should come, and then FDA has to be educated as well and logically defend it. Like, this is how we are doing it. But when an inspector comes in to look at, let's say, audit you guys, right? Like a study or anything, if you are using such tools, do you need to make them aware through SOPs and, make sure that it's documented, like how you're using it?
Yeah, I think one of the things is, because the answer is yes. And I think what regulators are expecting is evolving, right? I think if you look, for example, and I know you're aware of this, we've had one of the questions that came up in this AI and GXP work stream that we're doing across divisions is, well, what is our requirement to disclose to regulators that we're using AI, right? And in some areas where we were working on AI tools to, say, do first draft of a clinical study protocol or something like that, the question becomes of, well, if you submit this protocol to the FDA, does it have to say on the document Gen AI was used as to generate first draft of this? And there's been some debate around that. But what you're starting to see, I think, from regulators is that from an MHRA, for example, just updated their GCP regulations, right, along with their pre-inspection template. And the MHRA they'll do pre-inspection requests of you, and part of that template now specifically asks you, where you're using Gen AI in your clinical study process, how it's being used, what governance is around it and all this. And I think part of that is because there have been some, I'm aware of some regulatory findings where, some of the major agencies have come in and they've specifically asked, are you using Gen AI in X, area that we're auditing? And, the answer's been yes. And the regulators haven't had necessarily an issue with the use of Gen AI, but they've had issues with the fact that it wasn't adequately documented and disclosed within your procedures or your guidance documents and things like that. And part of it is, have a particular process is covered under SOPs. And sometimes you have guidance documents associated with the SOPs. And, what you have to do, and, what we're seeing from regulators is they want somewhere within that documentation of the use of AI, how it's being used, and what the accountability or responsibility of the person in the loop is.
I agree because we had Bob Buhlman. He is the head of digital quality at AstraZeneca. He was on the same show 2 months ago, and talking to him, and he interacts with quite a few on the manufacturing side. He interacts with regulators across FDA, MHRA, the Chinese regulators, Japanese, you name it. But he says every inspection is part of. Always the interest is on the AI side.
Mm.
They're more curious, in fact, like you said, to know what is the tool, how does it do, what has been your experience, how are you using it? Because they do use, right? I mean, company like AstraZeneca, just like Merck, they're using AI in
Yeah.
different capacities, in different modes. But that's what I also hear, and Bob kind of validated that statement. So, given all this experience, right? Let me step back a little bit. Data is always, in your case especially, there's a lot of data, right? You need to get access to data. So how does that work? Your team is handling it, meaning the analytics piece, the app building is happening within your team. But how does the data ingestion and data validation, how is that handled? Because that's, I think, a bigger lift, in my opinion, than actually designing the apps and the visualization.
Yeah, I think, we started to build, I think, an analytics function, probably start to try to build it like 4 or 5 years ago. The AI piece has come into it more recently. And one of the biggest challenges we had was, one was, we had a lot of data that wasn't clean. Databases with a lot of free text fields, databases where data wasn't necessarily entered in properly. And I think over the course of the last several years, we've gotten new systems in, and there's been an emphasis on, the necessity for good data, clean data, that I think has helped us. The other aspect of it is that I think has progressed is that, when we started this kind of analytics program 4 or 5 years ago, we would need to go to the organization that technically owned the data and try to justify to them why we needed access to their data and what we were going to do with it. And of course, there was some hesitancy, right? I think around, well, what are you doing with my data? Fact is, it's Merck's data, but people feel ownership of the certain data, and there was some distrust associated with that. What's happened now is we have, I think, an MRL data governance committee, and there's representatives on that committee from IT, obviously, but also from the various business units within functional units within MRL, and all requests for example, all data requests for access to data or use cases go into this data governance committee, right? And we have a data lake, and we have a fair number of data sources within that data lake. The only time that we need to, so we submit a use case to this data governance committee. It goes through, it gets, approved. They may come back with questions. We can use the data for that particular use case. If there's a different use case leveraging, that same data or different aspects of that same data, we have to go back with a new use case. And that's part of just controlling, trying to keep control of how the data is used, right? And what people are doing with it. We can do all this internally within our own organization. The only time that we need support right now from an IT perspective is if we need new data ingested into the data lake that's not already there.
Is that working okay now? Because you're talking about this data governance that's across Merck, right? A global organization.
This data governance piece is across MRL.
MRL, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously,
Yep.
manufacturing might have their own on the other
Correct.
side, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So you don't see that as a difficult situation now to get access to data.
It's become a lot better. We used to have probably months delay in being able to start a project because we were going back and forth with a particular organization about, getting access to their data and justifying what we were going to do with it. The data governance committee, I think, has streamlined that. I think it's still being honed, but it has significantly improved our ability to get access to data and get approval for use cases.
Great. I'm just going to switch topics now. I know you're
Mhm.
part of the Impala consortium,
Mhm.
and I think there are about 20 pharma companies, if I remember correctly. But some of the bigger ones are there, right? Like Merck, Roche, and
Mhm.
a few others, AstraZeneca, and a few others.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that way, it gives you an opportunity. You're part of that too, right? You as a Merck and
My team is, yes. I have the lead of my analytics and tech systems team sits on the Impala group.
so can you tell us a little bit about how other companies like Merck are looking at this? What are some of the challenges they're trying to solve in this consortium? Both sides, individual companies having their own challenges or their own roadmaps versus as a group, what are you trying to solve?
Yeah, so I think, this Impala organization, you're right, it's grown. I believe it's over 20 some organizations now, and it's research quality organizations. So I think the initial intent of it was when it first started, was to discuss and develop kind of open source analytics use cases that could be shared amongst the team. And we've gotten some use cases from there that we've brought in house, but also use cases that we've expanded. I think, the group remit has, I think, expanded a little bit. And, we're now looking at AI also. And, I think one of the benefits of these organizations, I think, is that there's a couple benefits. One is you can understand how other organizations are approaching, the use of like AI in GXP, right? But also you can help influence how other companies are doing it, right? And, I think, for example, one of the projects that's been identified by this Impala organization that our group is involved in is, they're looking to develop a white paper around, the validation of AI solutions. And that's a good thing because, when we're looking at like this AI and GXP work stream and what we're trying to do with that work stream is we're taking a look at our existing policies, right, around SDLC and around AI and ethics. And we're ensuring that there's aspects in those policies that cover GXP AI. And then we're also trying to develop some core principles or standards that could be utilized across GXPs, right? So when you take those out to the different GXP areas and you go below those core principles or standards, some things may be different because GXPs are different, but you would generally be aligned on approach and standards. And, one of the things that we're also trying to do is this work stream's been, I think, in place now for a couple months. It's intended to be a short-term work stream, I think, for another 6 to 8 months. And one of the things that we're doing both on the manufacturing side and on the research side is we want to take the output of this and take it out to industries, organizations, right? To professional organizations like PDA, DIA, to groups like Impala, because we want to try to A, get input on how other companies are doing it, but B, also try to influence the environment, because in areas like this where the regulations are rapidly evolving and what regulators are expecting is rapidly changing, you're safest if you're aligned with others in industry, right? Where you don't want to be as an outlier and doing something different from everybody else.
Larry, in my opinion, we as a pharmaceutical industry, right, we have not done a very good job in this space in trying to come up with standards or just collaborating and influence the dialogue on especially an important topic like Gen AI. I'm glad that's happening, that you're thinking that way and you're trying to execute that.
Yeah, and again, I think that, it not only benefits us, but it benefits industry in general too, because, if regulators come to a company and they see you're doing something that no one else is doing and they don't necessarily like it,
I agree.
they're likely to write you up for it. If they come to your organization, or they're going to different companies and they're seeing the same general thing being done, they can take issue with it, but generally it's more of an industry conversation, right?
I get
And
it.
it perhaps a shift in their guidance to get more detail associated around that particular area.
Yep. So how do you see this? Now you already neck deep into developing AI apps, right? And you already gave us some examples. So what's on the roadmap? Are you going to expand on that in terms of growing the number of apps, scaling it up so that, more processes are looked at, more processes are looked at?
Yeah, I think we have to. You know, and again, I think that there is a tremendous amount of focus at the senior levels of the Merck Research Organization across all groups on, identifying efficiencies, leveraging digital, leveraging AI. Because it's no secret, Merck announced some time ago that they're doing a multi-year reorganization, and they're going to have less people. I think because of the emphasis from senior level leaders within the Merck Research Organization on continuing to identify opportunities for efficiencies through leveraging analytics and AI, we have to. And B, the other aspect of it is again, we have probably 10% less people than we had a couple of years ago. I would wager a guess that we have 20% plus more work.
Yeah.
Through Merck has I think a great pipeline. We continue to do, internal pipeline growth. We continue to do uh, strategic acquisitions and collaborations, and it just continues the work. So we have to continue to identify, I think, use cases for AI where it can assist our auditors. And I mentioned one of them to you before that, I think that with the tool that we're developing to assist auditors with report writing, we focused that in on a group that we know had enough training data in order to develop the tool effectively. There are other groups that have a fair amount of data. I think once we get this up and running for that particular group, the next step will be to go to some of these other teams and say, okay, let's take a look at your data and see if we can make this work for, your aspect of, the quality group. And the same is, I think, the case with I mentioned to you that there's a potential use case that we've been discussing around using analytics with perhaps some AI embedded in there around identifying areas where we've had prior issues and the CAPA's not effective. So yeah, we'll absolutely continue to look for opportunities where we can leverage AI.
Just personally, Larry, are you very positive based on all the experience you had the last couple of years, getting into even developing apps? Your group is developing apps. I've already deployed it. So personally, do you think it's a value add and you see more of it helping your group?
Well, first of all, I guess it all depends on what aspect you're talking about. From a confidence perspective, I'm tremendously confident in my team's ability to work in this area. We have some outstanding people on the team. I think that from our ability to continue to progress this model, I think that if we keep our focus in the area, if we keep our strategic focus in the aspect that we have been, which is looking for opportunities where we can assist auditors, but B, also leverage analytics and AI to ensure that we're focused on the highest risk areas, whether it be signal detection tools, whether it be tools that are identifying risk that's emerging.
And also proactive, right? Proactively.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
More proactive, more predictive. Because I think that, you can use the AI tools to take out some of the more manual aspect of it, but being able to leverage analytics with perhaps AI components to ensure that your limited resources are focused in the areas that they need to be focused, or are looking at signals that tell them, hey, when this has happened before, we've had issues. So the same set of circumstances is happening right now. So you might want to take a look at this area.
Correct. And you see that probably in the next few months, do you think? Something like this?
I think it'll be a continuous process. Yes. I mean, we're starting some of those tools now. One of the areas that we've initially focused a lot on, I think from an analytics and AI tool development, is the clinical investigator site audit area, because that is where, we had the most travel expense, where we had, the most number of audits. And, we're starting to, whereas we used to do, I think, couple hundred plus investigator site audits a year, we're still going to do investigator site audits. But what we're doing is we're trying to leverage analytics with some AI components to do signal detection. And we're trying to do more broadly study level audits, leveraging the data that we have available to us. There's a tremendous amount of data that's coming in from, from suppliers that are supporting the study, from labs and imaging and, ePro, eCOA. There's also a tremendous amount of data coming in from clinical investigator sites. And I think we're trying to leverage that data with, with like analytics models to cut down on the number of investigator site audits and help us hone in on where we should be looking at from a signal detection perspective.
Okay. I think that's where the value is, I think, because you'll be focusing more on the high risk areas, right? Not everybody. Yep. It's just not the travel, right? It's also, there's a limitation. How many people can go travel and to how many sites and the audit coordination?
It absolutely is. And I think, I when we first started the analytics program, which now has the AI component several years ago, it was because we knew that we wanted to move the quality organization to be more proactive, more predictive, less reactive. I think some of the priorities have changed since then. Now it's become more of, okay, we know we have less people. And, if we don't change the way we work, we're just going to be doing less and accepting more risk, which is not something that we can justify, right? So we need to leverage these tools to be able to change the way we work, to ensure that auditors' time is freed up from manual tasks, but also to ensure that these tools are helping us identify where are the areas that we need to ensure that our quality professionals are focused on. Where's the highest risk areas?
Bottom line, right? It needs to add to your quality bottom line. Absolutely. It's just not saving money and efficiency, but also increasing the quality, right?
No, absolutely. And I think that's the key, is that, I think part of the messaging coming out of this is we can't just do this because we have less people, and we can't change the way we work leveraging digital and analytics and AI and say, okay, well, it's much riskier doing this.
Exactly.
We have to be able to develop something that is either the same amount of risk or less risk than what we did before, leveraging these tools.
Larry, we are out of time, but I'm going to ask you, this is a lightning round. I'm going to ask you simple, short questions and just give me short answers, about 5 of them, okay?
All right.
Biggest misconception about AI in pharma right now?
I think the biggest misperception about AI in pharma right now is that people, I think, assumed it could do a lot more than it could initially. And the biggest misperception is that there's a cost associated with developing these tools and maintaining these tools as well. Yep.
One regulation or guidance document every quality leader should read this year, in your opinion?
I think the draft FDA guidance around the use of AI in drug development, and also I think just looking from a key principles perspective, the FDA EMA AI principles document that came out sets out a good model.
Yep. Recently, that's a joint one you're talking about, 10 principles. Yeah.
Yep. Make it multi-disciplined. I think that's one of the things you'll see emphasized in the a lot of the guidance documents and regulations that are coming out across the different regulators, is that you can't just have it be like IT people or just or IT and quality people. It should be people that are using the data and associated with the data. It needs to be a multi-discipline team.
GXP regulated AI, are we overthinking it, underthinking it, or just right?
I think we're underthinking it. It's interesting because I think there's different risk tolerances depending on the GXP area. I think there's less of a risk tolerance from an AI perspective on the manufacturing side. There's a little bit more of a tolerance on the research side. And I think I say we're underthinking it because I don't know that we have a lot of the necessary structure, tools we need to properly and adequately vet some of the solutions.
Larry, there's a good question here. What's the FDA's perspective on continuous learning models, considering EU Annex 22 limits its usage of such models? It doesn't directly apply to you, but you're in touch with manufacturing also, right? And so can you just throw some light on it?
Well, I think that I think if you look at the EMA AI Act, right, it specifically says no Gen AI in high priority or high risk manufacturing areas, right? So I think from a continuous learning model perspective, and again, this is all, I think, relatively new in the GXP space, but you're starting to see some consistency across these different documents. You have to have tools that routinely monitor it, right? You have to have tools that you initially need to identify the accuracy of it, and B, you need to have tools that continuously monitor the accuracy of the tool.
Correct. Larry, one more question. How much resource and time was spent on cleaning data? Did you have an organized audit management system that you derived your data from? Remember, you were talking about getting the data out of your data lake and leveraging the data.
Yeah, I couldn't even wager a guess as to how much time was spent cleaning data. What I would say is that I think a lot of it happened because we transitioned to new systems. For example, we have we've incorporated a lot of Veeva solutions, right?
Yep.
So we went from systems that had fragmented data to new systems where perhaps we migrated some of the data, but we also incorporated stronger data standards, right? So that was, that's something that happened, I think, over the course of probably 3-4 years. And yes, we have a structured QMS system. We leverage Veeva for our audit workflow, inspection workflow, deviations workflow, quality risk management workflow.
Got it.
That's one other aspect we never even talked about, though, Nagesh.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Software as a service providers who
Yeah,
are going
actually, I came up. Actually, go ahead. Good, you brought it up.
who are going to who are going to incorporate
Yeah,
who are going to
you need to audit
incorporate
them too.
AI agents, right? So, that's something that's just another thing that that you need to look at from a quality perspective, at least from a GXP perspective of
Yes, you need
how
to
does that
have
work?
different auditing models also, like how to audit them. Correct?
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
Yep.
agree. Is the adoption of AI for the observations and report writing going as planned, or also do you see immediate wins such as quick turnaround of reports?
So it's still in the pilot phase. I think it has went well. Again, so consider the perspective that we've got multiple different areas of focus within the quality organization. We've got a tech quality group, we got a supplier quality group, we got a lab quality group, we got a pharmacovigilance quality group, we got a preclinical GLP quality, clinical quality assurance. Not all those groups are going to have enough data to train the system, right? So we start in areas like the clinical quality organization that has enough data to be able to adequately train the system. And what I would say is that it's went well. I think one of the things that we're looking at, and hopefully it'll go live middle of this year, and I think there'll be a significant savings from an individual writing a report writing perspective. One of the things, though, that I think we're looking at is all these guidance documents that are coming out now, and as the requirements are becoming a little bit more clear, are we solid from a documentation perspective on the development of this tool, or are there things we need to go back and tighten up?
How do you evaluate the quality and compliance readiness of external AI solutions coming from startup environments?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it's a good question, and I don't know that there's a good answer to it yet. I think that, from like an AI solutions perspective, we can't just bring in an AI solution. There's a process, through our procurement and IT organization where if you've identified some AI solution that you want to bring in, it has to go through, kind of a due diligence process and a vetting process, right? So that's one control over it to ensure that the tool I think is fit for purpose, fit for use. From a vendor perspective, if you're talking about, like your vendors, your suppliers leveraging AI, I think one of the things that we're starting to see that, right? They want to save money and become more efficient just like we do, right? And I think one of the things that's key is ensuring that A, you're aware of it and that they're disclosing it to you, and B, one of the things that we're doing is we're connecting up our data scientists with our people who are auditing vendors and ensuring that they're looking at the right things, that they have the right attributes, that they're looking at, and the right questions they're asking around the use of AI. And if need be, during the course of an audit, they have a friend, from a data scientist perspective.
Larry, one thing is, are you also considering, let's say there is a startup which is not a very big company like Google or, Microsoft, but they have a good solution that you would like to use. Would you consider them as Merck? Can I go through your prior audit process and help you give you the tool so that you can use it?
Yeah, I mean, someone would have to request it, right? And then it would go through, it would go through our kind of our supplier assessment process or qualification process. If it was a GXP tool, if it was a GXP tool, the quality organization would be associated with the qualification of it. But yeah, I mean, if a company has a tool, I think, that they think could leverage, I think, just going to, I think, our IT or our procurement group and say, hey, we want to be added to your list. I don't think he'll do it.
Correct.
But if you've got somebody internally that you've, perhaps demoed your tool to or talked to about, how your tool may benefit them and they're interested in it, the internal person can put in a request to go through the vetting process.
Got it. Is the adoption of AI for the observations and report writing going as planned? Seeing that Merck's Digital Sciences Studio just launched its second cohort in Montreal. Actually, I wanted to ask you regarding this. That is good it came up. 12 startups focused on AI for preventive health, biologics R&D, and translational models. How do you evaluate the quality and compliance readiness of external AI solutions coming from startup?
The organization. But yes, we have an organization that invests in smaller startup companies that they believe could potentially provide a useful service or a useful tool to the industry or to Merck.
One more question, Larry. The EU Act's high-risk provisions become enforceable in August 2026, which is coming. The high-risk provisions. That's less than 5 months away. A clinical trial design, patient cohort selection, and safety signal detection are all classified as high risk, with penalties up to 7% of global annual turnover. How prepared is the industry? I know I read about it. It's coming up in August 2026. The high risk provisions.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not up to date on that.
Okay, sounds good. Larry, it's exactly on top of the hour, so we are good. Larry, this has been an outstanding conversation. We touched upon many things, right? In terms of using AI, leveraging AI from a organizational or the enterprise level to some smaller workflow changes and making it work and adopting it across your organization, particularly. And also, we talked about the consortium, the Impala consortium, vendors, and many things. So this is very beneficial to the audience because everybody wants to learn from others, right? Not just how to develop it, but also how to validate it and also how to defend it when the inspectors come knocking on your door. So this was a very good opportunity for us to listen to you. Thank you for being so generous with your time and insights. For everyone watching, from Follow XLM Continuous Intelligence on LinkedIn to catch your upcoming sessions. Every month we try to do an interesting LinkedIn live event, and we'll continue to do that. You can connect directly with Larry on LinkedIn as well, and he is listed as a speaker on this event. So via LinkedIn, you can message him, and this recording will be available, and you can watch it anytime. Larry, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nagesh. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope the audience got some value out of it.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good afternoon. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Bye.